Every leader, every business, and every industry must transform, and quickly. Yeah, I'm curious, like when you pair the human intelligence with these powerful tools of AI inside of an organization, what does that give you? What is it? Does it unlock something different than just one by itself?
One is faster growth and faster productivity.
Soft skills are power skills.
You are simply just an instrument to get me what I want.
Top and most critical soft skills that you see leading into the future?
I think the number one is what we talked about in emotional maturity, suspension of self-interest.
Christie, it is such a pleasure to have you on Transform Your Workplace. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
I'm really excited to be with you today. Thanks for having me.
We were talking before we started recording, and your book, it's so timely. It's called Essential: How Distributed Teams, Generative AI, and Global Shifts Are Creating a New Human-Powered Leadership. So at the beginning of the book, you said that leadership's failing. I want to know what you mean by that, and how does that statement look at like the current economic challenges that we're seeing right now, and even you describe in the book?
Yeah. Well, I mean, leadership is failing because we've got so many things happening in the world. And the shift for looking for answers has really moved from, public sector to the private sector. And I think that it's no longer viable to have leaders who are just technical experts or fiduciaries of a P&L or their business or shareholders. Really, employees are demanding that leaders provide answers for them from an AI perspective, from socioeconomic conditions that are happening, war in two areas, the Middle East and Europe. You're looking at employee engagement being at an all-time low and employee trust in leadership being at an all-time low. This is unprecedented times for leaders, and the headwinds that they're facing, really, we've never seen before. So we need a new kind of leadership. Yeah,
there's a quote that I pulled out that it's alarming in a lot of ways. The quote says, "Every leader, every business, and every industry must transform, and quickly, to reinvent themselves as flexible, human-driven enterprises if they are to flourish into the future." End quote. And I think as many organizations are pushing automation, AI, and will try to adapt to it, and other tools that will help scale their business, like, why do you believe that the human-powered approach is going to make the biggest difference?
Because that's what employees are telling us. I mean, let's look at the facts first, right? Employee disengagement is resulting in $8.8 trillion a year of lost productivity. That's the equivalent of Microsoft, Amazon, and Apple combined in annual revenues. Think about that for a second. Now, right. And on top of that, you're looking at this silent pandemic that we're really not adhering to, which is the mental health crisis. Now, that's costing us $322 billion a year. Leaders are saying themselves that they are experiencing in the last year alone, 45% say they're experiencing some kind of mental health crisis. So those are the facts on the table. You also look at what are employees telling us? Well, they're telling us they don't trust leaders. Only 62% globally have said that they trust leaders. Now that's heavily skewed by countries like China, Russia, and the Middle East, right? So looking at that lack of trust and looking at the Western countries, you're really looking at only about 40% of people think that they trust their leaders, right? So what employees are telling us is they need something fundamentally different from their leaders. They need a sense that, companies are leading with purpose, leaders are leading with purpose, that their insides match their outsides. Agency, employees want a sense of agency to work when, how, and where they want to. And we see the great numbers of return to office. And what we know in recent research is 1 in 5 employees state that they're lonely at work, physically at work. Wellness and connection are other things that employees are demanding of their organizations. So we need a new kind of leadership to lead with those kinds of priorities of humans at the center. That includes your employees, but it also includes your customers.
When you set out to write this book, were you speaking to existing leaders? Or are you thinking like, okay, this next generation of leaders coming up, you need to understand all these things to set us up for success, like economically and in our entire culture?
All of the above.
All of the above.
Right. All of the above. I mean, because we're really, look, if you look at the skills deficit that we're facing just in the US alone, we're having to fill 4.6 million jobs a year of new skills, right? Just to keep pace in our current growth in our economy. By 2032, we're going to be at a 6 million skilled worker deficit. These are real economic issues. And again, those aren't just because technology is entering the workplace. It's because humans expect to be treated like humans at work and not just a set of competencies.
Yeah, it's interesting because, in reading your book and even just hearing what people are saying about like, I'm looking for skills and I cannot find them. Like, what is causing the imbalance? There's a demand for the skills, but there's a lack of supply. What's driving it? I know it's multiple factors, but what's driving the lack of supply there?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things. One is our educational institutions haven't caught up with the rapid pace of change in technology. And so we're not teaching people the skills that they need to be competitive in the marketplace. Number one. Number two, the half-life of skills is shortening. Every day it seems like it's shortening. So this kind of rapid ability to learn on the job for our institutions and organizations to be engaged in developing our employees and upskilling them and reskilling them in some cases, they're not keeping pace either. And in fact, they're so focused on productivity that they're requiring employees to learn side a desk. And so we really need to recommit to the learning culture of our educational institutions as well as within our organizations.
I mean, this is one of the scariest things, right? Like, there's a stat, I think it's from the World Economic Forum, that said most organizations, like 44% of them, say within the next 5 years, the core skill is going to be disrupted. And there's going to be, it's going to be even bigger lack of supply of people and talent. And is that responsibility on the leadership to reskill those people? Is it the educational system? I worry about the next 5 years and what that looks like.
Well, I worry about it too, but it's leaders of all variety. Yes, of course, it's leaders in our educational institutions. We need to fundamentally look at how do we change how young people are learning and adapting, right? Quickly, right? There is certainly that. But in our organizational institutions, we have deprioritized learning and development. And the way we're providing learning and development is quite frankly, outdated, right? So what we really need to do, what leaders in institutions and in organizations need to do, is build in this learning and development, this reskilling and upskilling in the course of your work, not make it a side of desk. I mean, Brandon, listen, you and I probably live in worlds where you wake up and it is back-to-back meetings all day.
Yep.
And then a new technology gets introduced. And in fact, this is true with AI, gets introduced and employees are like, when am I going to have time to do this? And employers are saying, well, you just got to do it because you'll be more productive. And they're having to do it side of desk, or they're saying, I'm not going to do it at all. Right. So I think we need to reinvest in our employees, in learning and development, and frankly, in our communities as well.
I even think about like the educational system too. It's we've been doing things a certain way for so long, and how do we like rethink the way we're teaching our kids, and because they're eventually going to enter the workforce, and then leaders are going to be responsible for upskilling them and bringing them into the organization. I think of like, how do we transform something that's been so constant for so long?
I have some of the best role models of anyone out there in terms of education. My mother was an educator. I have
Amazing.
sisters who are educators, nieces and nephews who are educators. And what an incredible profession. I think what I have witnessed with them and learned from them more than anything is that it is very personal. You have got to be insatiably curious. And this is what we talk about for leadership as well. Insatiably curious about each student, right? What are their strengths? What aren't their strengths? How do they need to learn? What are their learning styles? What are the environments in which they succeed? Now, that is a very, right now, privileged place for kids who get to go to private schools. I find that absurd. We need to, while we have rote education in our public schools, we need to build it. First of all, we need to reward educators and teachers and pay them. Secondly, we need to put the resources necessary in educational institutions so that they can learn and be agile and learn the human and the people skills. And the teachers need the time to do that as well. And so I think that this is truly a systemic issue across the board. And so we need to have what we call emotionally mature leaders at all walks of life, whether that is a teacher, a frontline worker, or the C-suite.
Here's another quote I pulled from your book that's alarming, but I think people know we're heading here. Quote says, if every company is or will evolve to be a technology defined or dependent business, and the rapid and ever evolving advancements in tech create a constant need for new skills, end quote. What does this mean for the future of work, and how do we prepare? Like, if there's a formal learning and development process inside of an organization, how are we making sure that our people are up to speed on the latest tech and know how to use it?
Well, we need to have educational institutions in order to do that. Right. I think, two of the most wonderful experiences I had was one, being a partner at Deloitte for many, many, many years. That's where I spent the bulk of my career. Deloitte made the decision at a very unpopular time to build Deloitte University in Texas. And that institution came about really before it's time to say we need a commitment to constant learning and development of our people and of our clients, right? That has turned out to be one of the most successful examples of how you really upskill and reskill. The environment at Deloitte University is as conducive as anything to learning and being excited about learning. I mean, world-class hotel, world-class food and nurturing, a coffee shop, which we all need, right? But state-of-the-art learning facilities. That's one example. The other example is Apple's commitment to Apple University is to absolutely one of the most, I would argue, innovative company in the world has dedicated brick and mortar of faculty and curriculum development to consistently upskill, reskill, and build culture, values into everything Apple does. Now, those are two incredible examples. Now, does every company out there need to build a university? No. But they do need dedicated time and dedicated space to their employees to upskill them, whether that's through the metaverse or whether that's through AI itself or, in-class learning. These things have to be reprioritized in our organizations.
I don't know if you ever got this question, but I'm curious, why put so much investment in the human intelligence when maybe business leaders would think with all these AI tools and automation, I'll just automate my entire business. Is that possible? And why not?
No. I think that, I get this question a lot. Listen, I think that AI is incredible, right? And I think it will provide incredible advances for us, just like the internet did so many years ago, right? What AI will never be able to do, despite claims, is understand the human context in which, the answers or the suggestions or the data that provides. It will never understand how it will be successful in context of a group of humans or how humans use it. It needs governance. It needs security. It needs diversity. Much of what we hear from AI is from a single demographic or two, or the information we get is skewed and biased that way. It will never have that human intelligence we talk about in the book to actually make the technology itself meet the promises that we're all talking about.
Yeah, I'm curious, when you pair the human intelligence with these powerful tools of AI inside of an organization, what does that give you? Does it unlock something different than just one by itself?
It unlocks a lot of things. One is faster growth and faster productivity. If an individual knows how to use AI and discern its outcomes, understand the personal context or situational context in which those outcomes are going to be applied, if an individual knows the dynamics of the culture and adaptability of the outcomes of AI, if they understand all of that and have been trained in all of that, and frankly, have been trained on how do you ask the right questions of AI, right? Which is huge. You got to ask the right questions. Then if you are, if your company commits to you to train you that way, then the outcomes it's been looking for from you will happen much faster. So growth and productivity. The third thing is, and this isn't a small thing, engagement. People will feel more engaged because they've been invested in and they've been recognized for the unique talents as a human that they bring to a situation and to AI and its outcomes, right? So, and it will create greater connection throughout the organization and with your clients or your customers.
This is powerful. You said that people need to know they matter, and many people are really starting to question the human story that they're living. You call it the great reflection. What's driving this?
Well, I mean, it's just lack of trust, right? There is, everything starts with trust and leaders earning that trust and demonstrating to employees that they're seen, heard, and valued, right? Yep. And there is simply so many examples of where leaders are in it for themselves, right? And that you are simply just an instrument to get me what I want, right? I mean, we see the disparity in pay. We see, certainly most recently, the mandates around DEI and many companies folding in terms of their DEI practices. We see rhetoric around masculinity at work being, something we need more of. You are eliminating over half the workforce when you make statements like that. People fundamentally don't think they're going to be cared for at work. It goes back to early in the 19th century when we used to talk about cogs of the wheel, right? There's so much evidence to say why there is this mistrust. And I talked about it earlier, just the lack of engagement. 25% of leaders even say they're engaged at work, right? So I think that there's lots of indicators around this disconnect between leaders and employees. And not even leaders and employees, but leaders in the context of the communities in which they live and reside. So I think this comes down to leadership, full stop.
Yeah. I mean, there's a scary stat in your book that says globally, 1 in 4 workers believe that their voice matters at work. Yep. That's horrible. And yep. If we know that they don't feel valued, we know that they're not empowered. It doesn't give them agency. What tactics or strategies can we put in place to make sure that, for one, they feel a sense of purpose, and two, yep. that they feel like they can speak up and that they're heard?
Yeah. So we talk about a concept in the book, that is called emotional maturity, right? We need to shift the emphasis of leadership to be rather outcome focused or productivity focused solely to human focused. Now, when we've talked about human focus, we've often talked about emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is fantastic. It's a way for me to measure my attributes in terms of empathy and caring and all of those great attributes each leader needs. But in today's environment, it's not enough. We need to shift from emotional intelligence to emotional maturity. So we need an absolute shift in leadership from being self-focused to being human-focused, to not solving my own emotional intelligence issues, but to solve for the humanity in the workforce. And that starts with the suspension of self-interest. The second is insatiable curiosity. I talked about this a little bit earlier, but to really make the time in that incredible calendar to say, no, I'm going to miss a couple of meetings and I'm going to take 2 hours a day to understand what makes my employees tick. Right. And that insatiable curiosity leads to a building of culture and an architecting of a team that plays to each other's strengths, and that we are setting up a culture of high performance through understanding the capabilities of each individual and what they bring to the project or the outcomes of the business. Now, in order to do all of these things, we need some contextual competence. We need to understand that employees are coming to work not just as robots showing up at work, but they're coming with, kids who are troubled, autistic. They are dealing with parents who are aging. Yeah. They may be dealing with their own divorce or a health issue. I mean, it could be thousands of things, but they're not coming to work unencumbered and fully able to, to work to their fullest all the time. If we understand that, and it really is reliant on them, sharing that with us. But if we create an environment where you're safe, you're psychologically safe, you're physically safe, you're emotionally safe, we have a better idea of how to assist and help that individual thrive. And the organization will only benefit from that. But we need leaders who are skilled enough to do it.
Yeah, I mean, that brings me to my next question, which is like, how's well-being of people right now? And you talked about all those things that may be going on behind the scenes that leaders may or may not be aware of, the divorce, troubled children, all of these things that they bring to work. And then you've got the work side of things. And I hear the term burnout a lot. Like, how is well-being overall, and are leaders responsible for the well-being of their employees?
Yes.
Yeah.
They are. Listen, I said earlier, over 50% of leaders say that they are burnt out or have experienced a mental health issue in the last year. That's extraordinary. I believe, and many leaders are very frightened of this, is that I believe leaders are responsible for this. In a couple of respects. One is certainly organizations need to provide the great tools and access to things like Better Up, right? And healthcare for counseling services. All of those things are true. But what matters more than anyone is sitting across from somebody, their leader, saying, "How are you?"
Yep.
Right? It's really simple. And listening. I just wrote a post on listening never could get you in trouble, right?
Right.
So listening is really important, and engaging with employees as people, not just a set of competencies, as I've said before, or their title, right?
Yeah.
I think it's, in my time, and certainly when I was a diversity leader, many leaders shared with me how frightened they were to sit across from somebody who was different from them. I don't have anything in common. I don't know what to ask. I don't know what to do. I would be like, well, what would you do if you met this person at your kid's soccer game? Or what if you met this person at a cocktail party? Or how would you engage in a conversation? It is absolutely no different in our workplace.
Right.
Yet we have somehow constructed this kind of thinking that we can't talk about, our personal life or somebody else's. Those days are gone. And our younger generations in particular will not separate their lives, right? We used to hear the phrase that, I'm going to fit my work into my life. And we were so disparaging to the millennials when they started talking like that. And the Gen Zs are even more strident around this. Actually, as a boomer, and many of the boomers that I've interacted with, they're like, yeah, that's actually a good idea.
Yep.
Right? They're not divorcing who they are when they show up at your organizations. And we need to be sensitive to that. We are not counselors, so let's not say, but we have to be human and meet our employees where they are.
To me, one of the most important aspects of DEI strategies is it's that inclusion, that belonging. And I think with, the pandemic thrust a lot of these organizations into hybrid or fully remote work environments. And as younger people come into the workforce, how do we build that sense of meaningful connection where maybe it's not the norm inside the culture? Maybe they're uneasy about, what can I ask? What are some ways that you've seen really successful organizations do this well?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of innovation in this area, right? And that innovation can be as simple as having something like zip code dinners, right?
Yeah.
That not all employees are going to live, and be at work. So if we're in the same zip code, can we provide line of sight to each other, and organizations actually fund a dinner once a quarter for those people to get together, right? That is not rocket science.
Yeah.
But it's meaningful, right? Again, there can be times during the week where a employer will say, and this sounds crazy to say that only an hour, but we're going to take this hour on Thursdays that everybody connect with somebody different in their organization that they haven't connected with, right? And that's been very successful for some organizations. This notion of again, this is where I think Deloitte was ahead of its time. This notion of predictability and flexibility is that when you are engaged in a big deliverable or a project, sitting the team down and saying, okay, what do you want to do in your life that we need coverage? So for example, I want to go to a yoga class every morning at 7. Who can cover that 7:00 hour? Brandon, can you do it? And Brandon, in exchange, you need to have dinner every night with your family and be home at 6 or 5:30, whatever it is. I got you covered. No, you won't get any pings, no emails, no ever. I got you covered. So that you structure work so that people can cover for one another in the activities that matter to them. Structuring work is more, in a more human way like that, makes people feel included. And frankly, it makes them feel like a team. And that matters to people. It matters for connection, it matters for engagement, and it matters for personal relationships.
You talked about in the book that soft skills are power skills. And I'm thinking if we're going to design these organizations to be what we were describing for the future, soft skills are clearly going to be needed. What are like some of the top and most critical soft skills that you see leading into the future?
Yeah, I think the number one is what we talked about in emotional maturity, suspension of self-interest. When I'm engaged in a conversation with you and all I'm thinking about is what I can get out of you, I'm not engaged.
Yeah.
And people know it. People absolutely know it. So if we can go into and develop the skill, now many people call this empathy. I really think it's much more of a mindset shift to say, I am going to be 100% present and engaged, not distracted. I'm going to turn my watch off. My phone is in my back pocket. I'm going to listen to you, which is another skill that I think is a power skill. That's critically important, right? I also think that this notion of tell me about yourself, right? Really showing interest and engagement with someone. That's more than just some of the soft skills that we typically talk about, but really cultivating in a 5-minute discussion. I am all in on you. I'm present. I'm asking you questions. I'm sharing some stuff of my own, right? Some of the greatest leaders I've ever had are those leaders where they're speaking to you and no one else exists in the room. I mean, I'm sure you've had that experience.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
That is a power skill. That is an absolute power skill. Another concrete power skill is acknowledgement. How often are we truly acknowledging the efforts of an individual or a team? And that, yes, as a leader, I might be standing in front of the room, but you know what? I'm going to call up, Peter, or I'm going to call up Madeline, and I'm going to have them stand on the stage with me and say, like, you guys killed it on this. Acknowledgement, praise. We always go to what's wrong. We have a very, scarcity mindset in our organizations. Another power skill is to act in abundance.
Yeah.
So those are some of the ones that I think are not so obvious and are beyond just, the emotional intelligence ones, again, of empathy and caring and those types of things.
This has been a great discussion. And all I can think about is, the future can be bright, and we got to put in a lot of work as leaders to upskill our people. As leaders, we need to upskill ourselves. And for those that might be listening to this or have picked up your book and have read it, who feel overwhelmed and don't know where to begin, what advice do you have for them? Just one or two steps to just get started with this.
I think the most important step is self-care.
Yeah.
I think leadership is hard. I think it's really, really hard right now for all the reasons that we talked about. And we talk about resilience a lot of leaders and how they need to be resilient, but that doesn't tell us what to do. What to do is to stop, take time for yourself, really understand what self-care means. I mean, listen, I'm a type A personality, and I used to think self-care was, go hard at work and then go hard at the gym and then come home and do all the family things. I was wrong about that. My time at the gym, I love it. I still love it. I'm still a maniac that way, but that's not really self-care for me. I have to be quiet, whether that looks like meditation or a walk with the dogs, or it looks like having a conversation with one of my siblings that has nothing to do with work. We have to be very hyper vigilant and hyper focused on what self-care means. We have to be self-forgiving. We have to acknowledge that we're not going to have all the answers, and we have to forgive ourselves for that. The components of resilience, I think, are primarily those two things, and gratitude. Gratitude is huge. And if we can self-care through those two or three things, I think that is the most important thing leaders need to do today.
Well said. Christie's book is Essential: How Distributed Teams, Generative AI, and Global Shifts Are Creating a New Human-Powered Leadership. Great book, Christie. It's out as of January 22nd, so people go pick up the book. Where can people connect with you or learn more about your work besides buying the book?
Sure. Well, you can go to the book's website, smith-monahan.com. I have founded a company called The Humanities Studio. So you can also go to thehumanitystudio.com, where we are focused on all the principles that are in the book and what we just talked about, and being of service not only to organizations, but the communities in which they reside.
My guest today has been Dr. Christie Smith, author of Essential. Thanks for coming on the podcast. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Brandon. Appreciate you too.